Miller took off from England on December 15, 1944. His plane disappeared over the English Channel.
Major Glenn Miller is missing on a flight from England to Paris.
But it wasn't until years later what Miller's Norseman aircraft looked like.
Looked like the kind of airplane that Glenn Miller.
December 15th, 1944. A plane carrying one of America's biggest stars vanishes over the English Channel. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers. For 80 years, Glenn Miller's disappearance has been one of World War II's most haunting mysteries. The man whose music defined an entire generation just disappeared. And the theories? They're absolutely wild. Some say he was shot down by his own military, others claim he was murdered in a Paris brothel. There's even talk of secret Nazi assassinations. But here's what nobody talks about. In 1987, an English fisherman pulled something from the depths of the channel, something he was ordered to throw back into the sea, something that could rewrite everything we thought we knew. What he found that day might finally solve this 80-year-old mystery. And the truth? It's more shocking than any conspiracy theory ever suggested. Let's talk about Glenn Miller for a second. This wasn't just some musician. By the early 1940s, Miller had become the biggest thing in American music. His orchestra dominated the charts. Every song they released turned to gold. We're talking about the guy who created In the Mood, Moonlight Serenade, and Chattanooga Choo Choo. His band didn't just play music. They defined what music was supposed to sound like during one of the darkest periods in American history, when people turned on their radios during World War II. They weren't just listening to Glenn Miller. They were escaping reality. And he was making insane money doing it. $20,000 a week. In 1940s, money. That's the equivalent of over $300,000 a week today. The man was unstoppable. But here's where it gets interesting. At the absolute height of his success, Miller made a decision that shocked everyone. He walked away from it all. December 1941. Pearl Harbor gets attacked. America enters the war. And Glenn Miller, at 38 years old, married, wearing corrective glasses, decides he needs to enlist. The military wasn't even going to draft him. He was classified as 3A, which basically meant they didn't need him. But Miller didn't care. The Navy rejected him first. There was this whole scandal happening at the time about celebrities getting special commissions to avoid actual combat duty. Miller had nothing to do with it, but the Navy wasn't taking any chances. They turned him down flat. So Miller went to the Army instead. He didn't just show up and sign papers. He wrote a detailed letter to General Charles Young explaining exactly what he wanted to do: modernize military music, boost troop morale through entertainment, use his talents where they mattered most. The Army said yes. On October 7th, 1942, Captain Glenn Miller reported for duty. Now, you might be thinking this was some cushy desk job, some way for Miller to say he served while staying safe. You'd be completely wrong. Miller threw himself into military service with the same intensity he'd shown in his music career. He formed the Army Air Force Orchestra, bringing together the best jazz musicians and classical players he could find. This wasn't your typical military band. Miller was creating something revolutionary, a fusion of jazz, popular music, and classical arrangements that nobody had attempted before. By 1944, Miller and his band were stationed in England. They were broadcasting across Allied airwaves, performing at air bases, recording shows in multiple languages. They even did German-language broadcasts aimed directly at enemy troops. The goal? Break their morale while boosting ours. And it was working. Miller's music was reaching millions of soldiers. It reminded them of home, gave them something to fight for. His weekly radio shows featured guest appearances from massive stars like Bing Crosby and Dinah Shore. The man had essentially become a weapon of psychological warfare. But there was a problem. By December 1944, Miller was exhausted. His band had been grinding through an impossible schedule, pre-recording 80 hours of broadcasts before their planned move to newly liberated Paris. The troops there desperately needed entertainment. Wounded soldiers in hospitals, men on leave from the brutal fighting that was still raging across Europe. Miller wanted to get there fast, set things up personally, make sure everything was perfect for his band's arrival. That impatience would cost him everything. December 14th, 1944. Miller has a flight booked from London to Paris. Everything's arranged, he's ready to go. Then the weather turns. Dense fog rolls across England and the English Channel. Visibility drops to almost nothing. Flight after flight gets cancelled, including Miller's. Now, most people would wait, reschedule, play it safe. But Miller wasn't most people. He'd spent his entire career pushing boundaries, taking risks, making things happen through sheer force of will. This situation was no different. One of his colleagues mentions that Lieutenant Colonel Norman Bassel has a flight scheduled for the next day, December 15th. A small utility plane heading to France. There might be room. Here's the thing though. Miller's official travel orders didn't authorize him to take that specific flight. The plane was a Nordine UC-64A Norseman, a small single-engine aircraft. And the weather? Still terrible. But Miller didn't want to fall behind schedule. His band needed him in Paris. He made the call. He'd take Bassel's flight. December 15th dawns cold and damp. The fog hasn't lifted. If anything, it's worse. Visibility over the English Channel is dangerously low. Pilot John Morgan asks to delay the flight. The French air controllers refuse his request. Lieutenant Colonel Bassel makes an executive decision. They're going. Weather be damned. There's this moment before takeoff that tells you everything you need to know. Miller, clearly nervous, asks a simple question. Where are the parachutes? Bassel's response is chilling. He asks Miller if he wants to live forever. Think about that for a second. This is one of the most famous men in America, about to board a tiny plane in terrible weather conditions, and he's being mocked for having concerns about basic safety equipment. The Norseman takes off from RAF Twinwood Farm. 3 men aboard: Miller, Bassel, pilot John Morgan. They disappear into the fog, heading south toward France. And then, nothing. No distress call, no emergency signal, no communication of any kind. The plane simply vanishes somewhere over the English Channel. But here's what makes this even more tragic. The next day, December 16th, the Battle of the Bulge erupts. Germany launches a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes. It becomes one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. Suddenly, nobody's thinking about one missing plane. The military's attention is elsewhere. It takes 3 full days before anyone officially realizes something's wrong. December 18th. Someone finally notices that Major Glenn Miller never arrived in Paris. Imagine the scene. There's this theater full of soldiers waiting for their hero. The Glenn Miller Orchestra is there, ready to play. But their leader never shows up. They wait and wait. Eventually, drummer Tex Beneke takes over, leading the band through the performance. But everyone knows something's wrong. The news spreads fast. Glenn Miller is missing. The man whose music had carried America through its darkest hours has disappeared, gone without a trace. The military launches an investigation, but they have almost nothing to work with. No wreckage, no witnesses, no debris. It's like the plane simply ceased to exist the moment it flew into that fog. And that's when the theories start. Because here's the thing about mysteries. Humans hate them. We need answers. We need closure. We need to understand what happened. And when we don't get those answers, we start filling in the blanks ourselves. Over the next few decades, the theories about Glenn Miller's disappearance grow increasingly wild, each one more elaborate than the last, each one claiming to have the real answer that the military doesn't want you to know, but could any of them actually be true? Let's start with the most popular theory, friendly fire. In 1956, 12 years after Miller disappeared, a man named Fred Shaw comes forward with a disturbing story. Shaw was a navigator on a Lancaster bomber during the war. On December 15, 1944, his squadron had been sent to bomb Germany. But the mission got cancelled due to heavy fog. Standard procedure in this situation was clear. Bombers returning with unused ordnance had to dump it in a designated area over the English Channel, can't land with all those explosives still attached. Shaw claims he was watching the bombs fall into the water when something caught his eye. A small plane flying about 2,500 feet below the Lancaster formation, heading south. He watched in horror as the plane appeared to struggle, then suddenly flip over and crash into the channel. His bombardier and rear gunner saw it too. All three men filed a report. Here's where it gets interesting. Years later, Shaw sees the Glenn Miller story in theaters. He has this sickening realization. He pulls out his old logbook, checks the date, the time, the location. Everything matches Miller's disappearance. The theory suggests that Miller's plane accidentally drifted into the no-fly zone, where bombers were jettisoning their loads. Poor visibility, an inexperienced pilot flying by instruments. A small plane in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's compelling. It explains everything. There's just one problem. When researchers actually dug into the military flight records decades later, they found something crucial. The timing doesn't match. The Lancaster squadrons dumped their bombs at a different time than when Miller's plane would have been flying through that area. The paths never actually crossed. But that doesn't stop people from believing it. Because it sounds true. It feels true. Then there's the brothel theory. This one's absolutely wild. In 1997, a German journalist named Udo Ulfkotter drops a bombshell. He claims he's found secret government documents proving that Glenn Miller never died in a plane crash at all. According to Ulfkotter, Miller actually died from a heart attack in a Paris brothel while with a prostitute. The whole plane crash story? Just a cover-up to protect Miller's legacy and keep troop morale high. The story explodes. Tabloids go crazy. It's got everything. Conspiracy, government cover-ups. People eat it up. There's just one tiny problem. Ulfkotter backtracks almost immediately. He admits he never actually had any documents. The whole story came from some off-duty intelligence agent he talked to once. Zero evidence, zero proof. But damage is done. The theory's out there now, living in conspiracy circles forever. And then we get to the secret agent theory. This one's actually kind of believable. Miller was fluent in German. He was broadcasting propaganda messages directly to German troops. He worked closely with people who definitely were involved in intelligence operations, like British actor David Niven. Some researchers suggest Miller's mission to Paris involved way more than just entertaining troops. One version of this theory claims Miller was actually negotiating secret peace deals with high-ranking Nazis, that he had authorization to offer sanctuary to scientists like Werner von Braun, who would later become crucial to America's space program, that Nazi agents discovered this plan and assassinated him to prevent peace talks from succeeding. It's compelling. It explains why the military seemed so secretive about the whole thing, why they didn't report him missing for 9 days, why no serious investigation ever happened. But like the other theories, there's no actual evidence, just circumstantial details that could mean anything or nothing. Here's what all these theories have in common. They're exciting, they're dramatic, they give us villains and heroes and elaborate plots. They turn a tragic accident into an epic story, but they're also distractions. Because while everyone was chasing conspiracy theories and wild speculation, someone actually found something real. They just didn't know it yet. 1987. An English fisherman is doing what he's done thousands of times before, trawling the English Channel. Routine work, nothing special. Then his nets catch something unusual. He hauls it up. Twisted metal, corroded by decades underwater, the unmistakable frame of an aircraft small, old, completely wrecked. The fisherman does what anyone would do. Contacts the Coast Guard, describes what he found. The Coast Guard's response? If it's a World War II aircraft, it's probably a war grave. Throw it back. So he does. But here's the crucial detail. Before releasing the wreckage back into the sea, he records the exact coordinates, files them away, doesn't think much more about it. Years pass. Then one day, the fisherman sees a photograph. It's a UC-64A Norseman, the exact type of plane Glenn Miller disappeared in, and he recognizes it, not the specific plane, but the design, the structure, the way the fuselage was built, the engine configuration. It matches what he pulled from the Channel. This realization leads him to reach out to researchers at TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. These are the people who search for missing aircraft, the same team that's been looking for Amelia Earhart's plane. Rick Gillespie, TIGAR's executive director, reviews the fisherman's story, and he immediately realizes something crucial. In 1944, Glenn Miller's Norseman was the only aircraft of its type to disappear over the English Channel. It had a very specific construction steel tube fuselage covered in fabric, wooden wings, and most importantly, a Pratt & Whitney Wasp engine. If they can find a wreck matching those exact specifications, they've found Miller's plane, period. But here's the challenge. After 70+ years underwater, you're not going to find something that looks like a plane. The fabric covering, long gone, the wooden wings, completely disintegrated. Even the aluminum panels would be heavily corroded. What's left would look like scattered junk on the seafloor. A mangled steel frame, buried engine parts, maybe pieces of the propeller. It wouldn't scream aircraft wreck to anyone just passing over it. This is where modern technology comes in. TIGAR plans to conduct a side-scan sonar survey of the area. This technology can map the seafloor with incredible detail. It can detect shapes and materials that are completely invisible to the naked eye. If the sonar picks up anything interesting, the next step involves a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV with cameras that can capture close-up images of whatever's down there. The goal isn't to raise the wreckage. That might not even be legal. The English Channel is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. The depth at the suspected location is around 130 feet, and there's the whole war grave classification to consider. But if they can just confirm what's there, if they can photograph a Wasp engine and steel tube fuselage in the right location, that would be enough. The coordinates the fisherman recorded become the critical piece of this entire puzzle. Without them, searching the English Channel would be impossible. It's vast, deep, crowded with wrecks from 2 world wars. But with those coordinates, TIGAR has a realistic shot at finally solving this mystery. So why haven't they found it yet? Funding, logistics, the complexity of searching one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, the legal questions about disturbing what might be classified as a war grave. But the biggest reason? Because while this fisherman's discovery gives us the location, it doesn't actually answer the question everyone wants to know: what brought the plane down? While conspiracy theorists were spinning elaborate tales about Nazi assassins and friendly fire, a researcher named Dennis Sprague was doing something much more boring. He was reading military documents, weather reports, flight logs, maintenance records, all publicly available, all sitting in archives that anyone could access. Most of it had been ignored for decades because people were too busy chasing exciting theories. But Sprague, working with the Glenn Miller Archive at the University of Colorado, had a different goal. Glenn Miller's son, Stephen, had asked him to find the real answer, not the exciting one, the true one. And what Sprague discovered was devastatingly simple: carburetor icing. That's it. No grand conspiracy, no secret missions, just a combination of bad weather, a dangerous decision, and the brutal physics of cold weather aviation. Let's break down what probably happened that morning. December 15th, 1944. Cold, damp conditions over the English Channel. Perfect environment for ice formation. Small aircraft like the Norseman were particularly vulnerable to carburetor icing. When ice forms in the carburetor, it restricts airflow to the engine. The engine loses power. Eventually, it fails completely. Pilot John Morgan was already concerned about the weather. He'd asked to delay the flight. When his request was denied and Bassel ordered him to proceed anyway, Morgan was essentially forced to fly in conditions that were borderline suicidal for that type of aircraft. Add to this another critical factor. Morgan's experience level with instrument flying was limited. In heavy fog, pilots can't see anything. They have to rely entirely on their instruments. It's one of the most challenging aspects of flying. Without visual references, pilots can experience something called spatial disorientation. Your inner ear tells you one thing, your instruments tell you another. Studies show that once a pilot becomes spatially disoriented, they have about 178 seconds to correct it before a crash becomes inevitable. That's less than 3 minutes to figure out what's happening and fix it. Now imagine you're dealing with spatial disorientation and your engine is failing due to carburetor ice. You're flying blind through fog. You have maybe 8 seconds to react to the engine failure. Even the best pilot in the world would struggle. The weather data from December 15th confirms that conditions were exactly right for this scenario. Temperature, humidity, cloud cover, everything lines up. The real question isn't what happened to Glenn Miller's plane. The question is why the hell they took off in the first place. Bassel's decision to override the pilot's concerns was reckless. Miller's anxiety about not having parachutes was completely justified. The French controllers, who refused to delay the flight, made a tragic call. But none of that matters when you're falling out of the sky over the coldest waters in Europe. The plane probably went down fast. Engine failure, loss of control, impact with the channel. The Norseman would have sunk quickly in water that deep. No time for distress calls. No chance of survival, even if they'd had parachutes. And because it happened in one of the busiest shipping areas in the world, the wreckage was probably disturbed multiple times over the decades, dragged by fishing nets, scattered by currents, buried in sediment. That's why nobody found it for 43 years. 80 years after Glenn Miller disappeared into the fog, we finally have our answer. Not the exciting one, not the conspiracy, just the cruel reality of a bad decision made in terrible weather. Miller's legacy didn't need a dramatic ending to matter. His music still plays. 3 of his recordings sit in the Grammy Hall of Fame. His orchestra still tours annual festivals in Iowa and Colorado keep his memory alive for new generations. The man who gave up everything to serve his country deserved better than those final 8 seconds over the channel. But maybe knowing the truth brings its own kind of closure. Sometimes mysteries are just tragedies we haven't solved yet. What do you think? Does knowing what likely happened bring closure? Or do some mysteries serve us better unsolved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.